On March 14, 1969, inside Studio One at NBC's Burbank lot, the air carried that familiar electric hum that only live television could produce. The red on air light outside the stage doors glowed like a quiet warning, and beyond it sat an audience dressed for a Friday night out, unaware they were about to witness something that would blur the line between performance and reality. The broadcast was, as always, being carried by NBC, and the stage belonged to the undisputed king of late-night conversation, Johnny Carson. His show, The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson, had become a national ritual. Americans watched it the way earlier generations had gathered around radios. It was comfort. It was wit. It was safe. That night was supposed to be no different. Carson delivered his monologue with his usual timing. Political jabs about Nixon, light humor about the culture wars simmering across the country, jokes that were sharp but never cruel. The audience laughed, right on cue. The band hit its marks. Everything was smooth. Backstage, however, smooth was not the word. In one dressing room sat Steve McQueen. He wore a tailored tan suit, open at the collar, projecting effortlessness. He had built a career on controlled cool, on appearing as though nothing rattled him. Fresh off the success of Bullitt, he was at the height of his power. Studios fought for him. Directors adjusted schedules for him. He was, by most accounts, the highest-paid actor in the world. But his jaw was tight. Across the hall, in another dressing room, sat Clint Eastwood. He was reading quietly, long legs crossed, posture relaxed. His career had exploded through his collaboration with Sergio Leone in A Fistful of Dollars and had surged into American mainstream success with Hang 'Em High. He did not cultivate mystique the way McQueen did. He simply wore it. Neither man had been told the full format of the evening. When Carson introduced McQueen as the first guest, the applause was immediate and thunderous. McQueen stepped through the curtain to a standing ovation. He waved, gave a small half-smile, and took his seat on the couch. The first part of the interview was easy. They talked about the car chase in Bullitt. McQueen described doing many of his own driving stunts, speaking with casual authority. He leaned back, arm draped across the couch, legs crossed loosely. He looked like he owned the room. Carson, sensing comfort, shifted gears. "There's been talk," he said lightly, "about a rivalry between you and Clint Eastwood. Any truth to that?" McQueen's smile held, but something flickered behind his eyes. "Rivalry," he said. "You need two competitors in the same league for a rivalry." The audience laughed, but the laughter felt thinner than usual. Carson nodded, attempting to maintain the playful tone. "Well, Clint's actually with us tonight." The shift was almost imperceptible. McQueen's posture straightened. His hand tightened slightly on his knee. "Tonight?" he asked. Carson blinked. "Yes. He's our second guest." There was a pause long enough to register. McQueen chuckled. "Well," he said, "that should be interesting." Carson called for a commercial break. The cameras went dark, but the tension remained bright. Backstage, Eastwood watched the exchange on a small monitor. He did not frown. He did not smile. A production assistant asked quietly if he still wished to appear. "Of course," he replied. When the show returned, Carson's voice carried a faint tightness beneath its polish. "Our next guest," he said, "has become one of the biggest stars in Westerns. Please welcome Clint Eastwood." The band played. The curtain parted. Eastwood walked out with measured steps. No flirtish, no wave beyond a small acknowledgement. He shook Carson's hand and nodded once toward McQueen before taking a seat at the opposite end of the couch. The space between them felt wider than it was. "You two know each other," Carson ventured. "I know of Steve," Eastwood said evenly. McQueen did not extend his hand. Carson pressed on. "Steve was just saying there isn't really a rivalry." Eastwood glanced at McQueen. "That's so." McQueen leaned forward. "I said we're in different leagues." There it was. Eastwood didn't respond immediately. He studied McQueen the way one studies a horizon, calmly, without visible strain. "Leagues are funny things," he said at last. "They matter a lot to people who need them." A ripple ran through the audience. McQueen's jaw flexed. "You've built a career on one expression," he shot back. "You squint, you pause, you collect a check." Eastwood's face remained composed. "Seems to be working." The air thickened. McQueen stood. He didn't raise his voice at first, but there was steel in it. He talked about training, about dedication, about craft. He mentioned turning down roles he considered beneath him. He implied others had taken what he rejected. He referenced Italian westerns, suggesting they had manufactured Eastwood's fame. He spoke of artistry, of transformation, of disappearing into characters. The audience no longer knew how to react. Carson attempted to interrupt, but the current had already formed. Eastwood remained seated. When McQueen finished, standing over him now, voice sharper, breath heavier, there was a silence so complete it felt staged. Eastwood looked up. "You done, Steve?" he asked softly. The simplicity landed harder than any shout. McQueen blinked. Eastwood continued. "You work hard. Everybody knows that. You make sure they know it. That's fine." He stood then, slowly, closing the physical gap between them. "Me," he said, "I just show up and do the job." He paused, letting the weight of it settle. "You're trying to prove you're a movie star," he added quietly. "I already know I am." Gasps broke from scattered seats. McQueen opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came. Eastwood turned to Carson. "Sorry about the drama." And then he walked off stage. The curtain closed behind him. For several seconds, no one moved. Carson stared at his desk, as though it might offer instructions. McQueen remained standing, face pale beneath the lights. Then the audience erupted, not in applause, not in boos, but in a confused, overwhelming noise. Carson finally managed, "We'll be right back." The broadcast limped to its conclusion. By Monday morning, headlines dominated entertainment sections nationwide. Commentators dissected posture, phrasing, tone. Some painted McQueen as passionate, unwilling to tolerate condescension. Others saw insecurity, a man threatened by another's ascent. Eastwood's restraint became legend. The ratings were enormous. In the years that followed, the story hardened into myth. McQueen's career continued with successes like The Getaway and Papillon. Yet whispers began to follow him, about temperament, about difficulty. Directors admired his intensity, but hesitated at his volatility. Eastwood moved forward differently. He transitioned into directing with Play Misty for Me, proving he possessed instincts beyond performance. Then came Dirty Harry, cementing him as a defining screen presence of the decade. The two men rarely crossed paths publicly again. When McQueen died in 1980 at just 50 years old, tributes poured in. Eastwood's was brief and respectful. He spoke of dedication, of fire, of a man who demanded more from himself than most dared to attempt. Years later, when Eastwood stood on the Academy Awards stage to accept the Oscar for Million Dollar Baby, he reflected, not directly on that night, but on the nature of confidence. "There's a difference," he said, "between chasing the spotlight and standing in it." Those who remembered March 1969 understood. The footage of the confrontation, real or embellished through retelling, became cultural shorthand for two philosophies of stardom. One loud, driven, urgent. The other quiet, steady, unshaken. Perhaps the truth of that night mattered less than what it symbolized. Two men from humble beginnings had clawed their way into the Hollywood elite. Both carried scars from earlier struggles. Both feared irrelevance in an industry that devoured yesterday's icons without mercy. One fought to defend his crown. The other refused to acknowledge the battle. In the end, the lesson that endured was not about who won an argument. It was about composure, about the strange power of silence, about how sometimes the calmest voice in the room reshapes the entire room without raising its volume. And somewhere in the retelling of that night, through studios, biographies, late-night conversations, and film school lectures, the myth grew larger than the moment. Two legends, one stage, a clash not of fists, but of egos, and 6 quiet words that echoed far longer than the shouting ever could.